Chapter 6 of The Iron Heel by Jack London. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Matt Saw. Adumbrations. It was about this time that the warnings of coming events began to fall about us thick and fast. Ernest had already questioned father's policy of having socialists and labor leaders at his house, and of openly attending socialist meetings, and father had only laughed at him for his pains. As for myself, I was learning much from this contact with the working-class leaders and thinkers. I was seeing the other side of the shield. I was delighted with the unselfishness and high idealism I encountered, though I was appalled by the vast philosophic and scientific literature of socialism that was opened up to me. I was learning fast, but I learned not fast enough to realize then the peril of our position. There were warnings, but I did not heed them. For instance, Mrs. Pertonwaithe and Mrs. Wickson exercised tremendous social power in the university town, and from them emanated the sentiment that I was a too forward and self-assertive young woman with a mischievous penchant for officiousness and interference in other persons' affairs. This I thought no more than natural, considering the part I had played in investigating the case of Jackson's arm. But the effect of such a sentiment, enunciated by two such powerful social arbiters, I underestimated. True, I noticed a certain aloofness on the part of my general friends, but this I ascribed to the disapproval that was prevalent in my circles of my intended marriage with Ernest. It was not till some time afterward that Ernest pointed out to me clearly that this general attitude of my class was something more than spontaneous, that behind it were the hidden springs of an organized conduct. "You have given shelter to an enemy of your class," he said, "and not alone shelter, for you have given your love, yourself. This is treason to your class. Think not that you will escape being penalized." But it was before this that father returned one afternoon. Ernest was with me, and we could see that father was angry, philosophically angry. He was rarely really angry, but a certain measure of controlled anger he allowed himself. He called it a tonic, and we could see that he was tonic angry when he entered the room. "What do you think?" he demanded. "I had luncheon with Wilcox." Wilcox was the superannuated president of the university, whose withered mind was stored with generalizations that were young in 1870 and which he had since failed to revise. "I was invited," father announced. "I was sent for." He paused, and we waited. "Oh, it was done very nicely, I'll allow, but I was reprimanded. I, and by that old fossil." "I'll wager I know what you were reprimanded for," Ernest said. "Not in 3 guesses," father laughed. "Oh, 1 guess will do," Ernest retorted. "And it won't be a guess. It will be a deduction. You were reprimanded for your private life." "The very thing!" father cried. "How did you guess?" "I knew it was coming. I warned you before about it." "Yes, you did," father meditated. "But I couldn't believe it. At any rate, it is only so much more clinching evidence for my book." "It is nothing to what will come," Ernest went on, "if you persist in your policy of having these socialists and radicals of all sorts at your house, myself included. Just what old Wilcox said. And of all unwarranted things, he said it was in poor taste, utterly profitless anyway, and not in harmony with university traditions and policy. He said much more of the same vague sort, and I couldn't pin him down to anything specific. I made it pretty awkward for him, and he could only go on repeating himself and telling me how much he honored me, and all the world honored me as a scientist. It wasn't an agreeable task for him. I could see he didn't like it." "He was not a free agent," Ernest said. "The leg bar is not always worn graciously." Note: leg bar. The African slaves were so manacled, also criminals. It was not until the coming of the Brotherhood of Man that the leg bar passed out of use. "Yes, I got that much out of him. He said the university needed ever so much more money this year than the state was willing to furnish, and that it must come from wealthy personages who could not but be offended by the swerving of the university from its high ideal of the passionless pursuit of passionless intelligence. When I tried to pin him down to what my home life had to do with swerving the university from its high ideal, he offered me a 2 years' vacation on full pay in Europe for recreation and research. Of course, I couldn't accept it under the circumstances." "Oh, it would have been far better if you had," Ernest said gravely. "It was a bribe," Father protested, and Ernest nodded. Also, the beggar said that there was talk, tea-table gossip and so forth, about my daughter being seen in public with so notorious a character as you, and that it was not in keeping with university tone and dignity. Not that he personally objected, oh, no, but that there was talk, and that I would understand. Ernest considered this announcement for a moment, and then said, and his face was very grave, withal there was a somber wrath in it, "There is more behind this than a mere university ideal. Somebody has put pressure on President Wilcox." "Do you think so?" Father asked, and his face showed that he was interested rather than frightened. "I wish I could convey to you the conception that is dimly forming in my own mind," Ernest said. "Never in the history of the world was society in so terrible flux as it is right now. The swift changes in our industrial system are causing equally swift changes in our religious, political, and social structures. An unseen and fearful revolution is taking place in the fiber and structure of society. One can only dimly feel these things, but they are in the air, now, today. One can feel the loom of them, things vast, vague, and terrible. My mind recoils from contemplation of what they may crystallize into. You heard Wickson talk the other night. Behind what he said were the same nameless, formless things that I feel. He spoke out of a superconscious apprehension of them." "You mean," Father began, then paused. "I mean that there is a shadow of something colossal and menacing that even now is beginning to fall across the land. Call it the shadow of an oligarchy, if you will. It is the nearest I dare approximate it. What its nature may be, I refuse to imagine. But what I wanted to say was this. You are in a perilous position, a peril that my own fear enhances because I am not able even to measure it. Take my advice and accept the vacation." Note: though, like Everhard, they did not dream of the nature of it, there were men, even before his time, who caught glimpses of the shadow. John C. Calhoun said, "A power has risen up in the government greater than the people themselves, consisting of many and various and powerful interests combined into one mass and held together by the cohesive power of the vast surplus in the banks." And that great humanist, Abraham Lincoln, said just before his assassination, "I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. Corporations have been enthroned, an era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until the wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed." "But it would be cowardly," was the protest. "Not at all. You're an old man. You have done your work in the world, and a great work. Leave the present battle to youth and strength. We young fellows have our work yet to do. Avis will stand by my side in what is to come. She will be your representative in the battlefront." "Oh, but they can't hurt me," Father objected. "Thank God I am independent. Oh, I assure you, I know the frightful persecution they can wage on a professor who is economically dependent on his university. But I am independent. I have not been a professor for the sake of my salary. I can get along very comfortably on my own income, and the salary is all they can take away from me." "But you do not realize," Ernest answered, "if all that I fear be so, your private income, your principal itself, can be taken from you just as easily as your salary." Father was silent for a few minutes. He was thinking deeply, and I could see the lines of decision forming in his face. At last he spoke. "I shall not take the vacation." He paused again. "I shall go on with my book. You may be wrong, but whether you are wrong or right, I shall stand by my guns." Note: this book, Economics and Education, was published in that year. 3 copies of it are extant, 2 at Ardis and 1 at Asgard. It dealt in elaborate detail with one factor in the persistence of the established, namely the capitalistic bias of the universities and common schools. It was a logical and crushing indictment of the whole system of education that developed in the minds of the students only such ideas as were favorable to the capitalistic regime, to the exclusion of all ideas that were inimical and subversive. The book created a furor and was promptly suppressed by the oligarchy. "All right," Ernest said. "You are traveling the same path that Bishop Morehouse is, and toward a similar smash-up. You'll both be proletarians before you're